I just want to go ahead and get us started. My name is Marcia Nedland. I am one of the organizers for the Middle Neighborhoods Community of Practice. We'll explain that in a second. And today's topic is getting code enforcement right in middle neighborhoods. We have a truly amazing panel, so it's going to be really interesting. Before we move forward, we'd love to have you just participate in our poll. We like to sort of get a sense of the sort of different sectors that are joining our webinars. Just you may find it interesting that we're about 2/3 nonprofit and 1/3 local government, but I have a feeling that's going to be quite different today because the topic is so related to local government. Five consultants. That's what I am.
Yeah, it's an honorable profession.
It's an honorable profession occasionally.
Yeah.
I saw a question in the chat box about who else can receive continuing education unit credits. I would say check with whatever organization, association that you're with. Make them aware of this webinar, and they may be able to still give you credits for it.
That's a really good idea. Currently, what we have is the California Association of Code Enforcement Officers has made it a CEC, but I think that Larry also had someone posted on the National Association.
The American Association of Code Enforcement. Yeah.
American, yeah. We're not 100% certain yet whether they're counting it or not, but they could be. So
yeah.
we'll definitely do whatever we can to support that process. We want you to get your credits. So, okay, Anne, I think you can close the poll. So we have 83% local government today. That is unusual, but we're so pleased to have you here.
It's closed. You just have to click the X to take it off.
I can do that. Okay. There are our results. So let's talk about middle neighborhoods for a moment. I'm just going to do a little bit about what we mean when we say middle neighborhoods, because it is the community of practice that's sponsoring this webinar. So the Middle Neighborhoods Initiative is a mostly volunteer-run national association of practitioners, policymakers, and researchers who are working in one way or another on sort of sustaining and keeping track of middle neighborhoods. And by that, we mean just the neighborhoods in your communities that are neither the most distressed nor are they the healthiest. You can probably imagine that in your mind. We don't have hard and fast metrics for those, but of course we tend to start with sort of the 80 to 120 area median income for households as a way to do a quick sort and then work from there to consider other characteristics in that local community. What we basically noticed when we started working on this is it was a group of those kinds of people who happened to stumble onto the fact that we were all noticing that middle neighborhoods, as we studied them and studied their long-term trends, were disappearing, and either through unchecked decline, which was slow enough that people weren't noticing it, or through more recently gentrification as the housing market has heated up. And because middle neighborhoods are those sort of mixed income, stable neighborhoods that we're often trying to create through, revitalization of more distressed communities or construction of new mixed income developments, it seems really important to many of us to try and invest in them now to keep them going before we have to invest a lot more in them, because they are either gentrified out of the possibility for people of modest means to live in, or they have declined to a point where it requires a lot greater degree of investment. So in the Middle Neighborhoods Initiative, it's a joint project of National Community Stabilization Trust and NeighborWorks America. We have a steering committee We have a community of practice that's about 3,000 people. We'd love for you to join us. It's free. But then you can keep track of all of our webinars, which we do on a monthly basis and are always about topics taught by practitioners that have something to do with, you know, topics that are of interest to people working in these neighborhoods. I'm going to ask Anne, can you communicate directly with the raised hands and see if we can help them out? I have a feeling it's a technical issue. So let's go on to our next slide. A little bit more about middle neighborhoods. They tend to be neighborhoods that were built mostly with single family homes, with the idea of them being occupied by families with children, which is one of the reasons that they're a little in sort of a confused demand right now, because that's a declining demographic nationally. So they really need to be repurposed for today's home buyers. They tend to be still well more than 50% owner occupied, but that becomes less and less clear. You know, they probably used to be 90% owner occupied, but they've been slowly eroding over time. As people move out, the housing stock doesn't get updated and investors start to buy them. The housing stock is aging, but it tends to be in generally acceptable condition, which is going to be a really interesting conversation with this panel today. But it may have code violations, and it more importantly may have, or more likely may have, a situation where it just lacks some updates and features that would allow it to compete well for today's home buyers, which makes it more vulnerable to investor purchase. And that's when things can start to go really south on maintenance without our partners in code enforcement. The other really interesting thing to me about middle neighborhoods is that they tend to be more racially, ethnically, and economically diverse than either their lower income or higher income communities. So it's really sort of this situation that we really want to help keep going. I think our next slide is about a mapping tool. Yes. So if you ever want to just take a look, you can check out our mapping tool, which all it does is, again, sort census tracts by different income levels and measures, which you can see over, you can toggle amongst them on the left side of the screen. And it's for an MSA, and it can be a first cut at looking at what neighborhoods sort of meet those income definitions. And then combined with a lot of your local knowledge, you can start to think more about where are your middle neighborhoods. And one of the things we really strongly encourage people to do, particularly in local government, is just to start to collect some data on those middle neighborhoods over the long term and see where they're trending, so that you can have a sense of what's the appropriate kind of strategy to keep them on the right course. So today, here's our great panel. So we're starting off with our friend of middle neighborhoods, Alan Malik, who's the senior fellow at the Center for Community Progress. Alan has written a lot about code enforcement as a tool for neighborhood stability. And we've asked him to sort of set the table and give us the big picture nationally about the trends in, you know, where code enforcement's been, where it's going, what are some of the common issues, and what are some of the common solutions. Then we're going to switch into two local situations where, with presenters who have done a lot of work to improve their code enforcement systems, either from inside the house, that would be Jake Dishaw, who's Deputy Commissioner of Code Enforcement and Zoning Administration for the city of Syracuse, New York, or from sort of outside or in partnership. Larry Brooks is the director of the Healthy Homes Department in Alameda County, California. And he, in that role, works with a lot of the city governments in Alameda County with their code enforcement departments to partner together to create more healthy homes, to mitigate more unhealthy circumstances in housing stock throughout the county. So it's going to be a fascinating panel, and I think we should go ahead and get started. I did want to let people know one of the promotions for this said we were going to let's see, I'm doing 12:30 Pacific time, but which would be 3:30, I think, Eastern time. But in fact, we're only going to 11:30 Pacific, 2:30 Eastern, okay? And our last 30 minutes or so will be Q&A. So meanwhile, if you could type any questions you have into the Q&A, there's a button at the bottom of your screen you can look at, click on to do that, or that's the easiest place for us to keep track of them. If you can't find that, you can put it in the chat. So I'm going to hand things over to Alan Malik first. He's been so generous with us on talking with our community practice on many topics, and I really welcome you, Alan. And that's a really cool new slide. I love your cover slide.
Yeah, I don't recall where I got it from, but it is really kind of neat. So I'm going to try to provide an overview of code enforcement with a focus on what does it mean to be strategic in code enforcement. And this, I think, is really the critical point, because I think there's some fundamental differences between code enforcement when it's not strategic and when it is. And I like to focus on that. So next. Okay. Now, these I pulled from a variety of city websites. None of them are wrong exactly. Yes, get voluntary compliance. Yes, provide fair enforcement. Yes, maintain standards. Yes, respond. But this is not, to my mind, what code enforcement is really about. What is code enforcement about? Next. Okay. My thumbnail definition when somebody asks me, what is the purpose of code enforcement, is to ensure, to the extent feasible, that all housing in the community is safe and healthy for its residents and neighbors, period. Not to enforce the codes, not to fine people, but and not, again, to focus on any individual properties. It's the all housing. And to do that, code enforcement has to be systematic and strategic. And as Marcia pointed out, in the middle neighborhood, typically you don't have the major problems of redevelopment and vacant properties that you do in a deeply economically distressed neighborhood. But you do have a lot of older housing that often has deferred maintenance, may lack amenities, may have lead paint, and a lot of other issues. And their condition can become a major deterrent to people, particularly younger home buyers, actually buying in a neighborhood where they actually wouldn't mind living. So code enforcement and the whole idea of making sure that housing is in good shape can be a central strategy to a middle neighborhood, even more so than in other neighborhoods where you may need larger scale redevelopment versus other neighborhoods where you really don't need much of anything. So next slide. So the first thing is, I would say any complaint, most cities and towns that have code enforcement agencies only do a complaint-based inspection, okay, which tends to be the minimum required by law. Now, obviously, where there's a complaint, you have to respond to it. But if you don't go beyond that, you will never, and I stress never, be able to reach the goal of code enforcement, which is to provide healthy housing, safe housing for all. Because a complaint, responding to a complaint means you go to a property, you check out the situation. Now, in some cities, when you get a complaint, the inspector is expected to look at the property generally and cite on other issues if he or she finds them at the time. In some cities, even that isn't required. They just focus on the specific issue of the complaint. But either way, at best, it fixes the problem with that property. At worst, the property is still a problem. And in both cases, it does nothing to improve the conditions of the properties next door. There can be a property next door with the same problems, but nothing happens. Moreover, as we all know, despite anti-retaliation ordinances, which are on the books in most states, a lot of tenants, especially low-income tenants, tenants who are undocumented, are reluctant to complain even when the conditions are truly horrible. So basically, what we want to do is go up this ladder. The next stage is rental registration. Now, to me, this is so fundamental that it's almost not worth talking about, except unfortunately, not everybody agrees with me. Rental registration is simply any city doing code enforcement should know who its landlords are, how to reach them, how to get hold of somebody in an emergency, how to somebody to serve legal papers on if necessary within a reasonable location. So a lot of registration ordinances say if you live outside the state or outside the county or outside the country, you have to have a local agent. This is basic. Just for the record, the state of New Jersey, where I live, has a state mandate that all landlords must register their properties. It has been on the books for 50 years. It is totally uncontroversial. Nobody I have ever heard has a problem with it. It's just a simple matter of doing business. Okay. The next stage is this is the big hurdle. If you want properties as a whole to reach a minimum standard, what you need is to have a proactive inspection program, which means that on some regular schedule, you, meaning the code enforcement agency or a third party approved by or licensed by or contracted by the code enforcement agency, inspects every property in the city. Now, not on every issue. You know, I'm sure you're all familiar with, there's probably not a property in the country that a really diligent inspector can't find a violation. But the point is not to do everything. The point is on a regular basis, using a checklist to make sure that the property meets basic health and safety standards. The leaks, proper functioning of all systems, functioning of windows, doors, the basic requirements. It can be every year, it can be every 3 years, every 5 years. That's a local decision, but the basic standard is to inspect for health and safety on a regular basis. A further standard going up the ladder. Now, there are some states that do not allow local governments to require this step. Most states allow it, but some do not, which is that a rental license be a requirement to rent out a property to an unrelated third party in the community. A license, it's basically like a business license. And certainly renting a property is a business. The advantage of a license is that if somebody violates the terms of the license, the first thing is you can do things other than simply fine somebody or issue a citation. You can actually remove their right to rent out that property, or, and a number of cities do this, you can require, say, a landlord who's a problem to go into some kind of essentially landlord remedial education or be monitored as a condition of retaining his license. So that adds another layer. And then finally, the last piece, which I think is a great strategy to do it, is now most, certainly in larger cities, most cities have some kind of computerized database of registered landlords where they can track what happens when the inspections go out. Are they in compliance? If they're not, how quickly do they comply and so forth? And what a growing number of cities are doing, using this database to categorize landlords So Minneapolis, for example, puts all landlords into tiers 1, 2, or 3. Brooklyn Center, Minnesota has 4 tiers. And then they vary the frequency of inspection, the size of the fee, and other things by the tier the landlord is in. So next slide, please. Okay, no, go back. Sorry, they're not in the order I thought they were. So, a landlord who's in the bottom tier, a problem landlord, might have their property inspected every year. In Minneapolis, a landlord who has a clean track record is inspected every 8 years. So that basically is a couple of things. First, good landlords know that if they maintain their properties, they get a lighter touch from the city. Nobody likes to be inspected. Nobody likes to pay fees. So the better they are, the less often they're inspected, the lower the fees they pay. The other thing it means is that a city can concentrate its resources on the problem landlords and not spend a lot of time sending inspectors to properties that they can anticipate are going to be clean. Okay, next slide, please. Now, there are a lot of challenges when you get into proactive regulation. I'm not going to go into the details on this. Each one of these I could talk for half an hour, as I'm sure Jake or Larry can. First, you've got to make sure all the properties are registered. And just one thing, passing an ordinance requiring landlords to register doesn't do the job. You have to have an active process of going out, finding people, telling them register or else. And it's an active outreach process, but it's very doable. It's not expensive, and a lot of cities make it work. The second is making sure you've got the staff. Again, you can use third-party contractors to do this, and make sure that you have a landlord or a fee, an inspection or compliance or licensing, whatever you call it, fee that is adequate to cover the cost of a periodic inspection. Now, that fee can be, in my experience, anything from, depending on the requirements of the program, the city, and so forth, anything from $50 to about $150 a year. And again, it can be varied depending on whether you're a good landlord or a problem landlord. But clearly, having a fee that covers the costs, or most of them at least, is critically important. And also making sure that if you do have a fee, that the mayor and the city manager or the council does not take money that is collected from the fee and put it into the general fund. Aside from the fact that that's not good for the code enforcement program, it's not legal. And a city that does that can be sued by a landlord and be forced to return the money to the landlord. Third, political issues, and I'm not going to talk much about them, but we all know that when you try to create a proactive rental inspection program, you can run into political difficulties. Landlords obviously would rather not be inspected, and very often there are landlords in key positions. One city I worked in, 2 out of the 5 city council members were landlords. That obviously made it somewhat difficult, not impossible, but difficult. And then there are legal issues that come up. Again, next slide. I'll mention this briefly, but I will focus on this because it's very important. First, you must know your state statute governing code enforcement, because every state's laws are a little bit different. Now, some states like New Jersey, California, I think, Michigan, and so forth, give cities quite broad discretion to craft code enforcement programs within certain basic constitutional and legal principles. Other states like North Carolina, Virginia, and some others impose rather strict restrictions on where you can do code enforcement, how you can do code enforcement, whether you can do licensing, whether you can require landlords to register, and so forth. So you must know exactly what is and is not permitted under your state law. You should also know the Constitution and some key decisions. Now, a big issue that comes up is, can you as a code enforcement officer go inside a property? And the short answer is yes. And there is a key Supreme Court decision involving the city of San Francisco that lays down the ground rules. Number one, if you ask to enter the property and the tenant or possibly the landlord refuses, you may not penalize the landlord or the tenant for refusing to let you into the property, number one. However, and you must go away. However, the Constitution says if the inspection is part of an overall program of inspections, you do not need to have evidence of a violation to get in to obtain a warrant to enter that property. So as long as some ordinance has been struck down because they provided penalties for landlords who refused access. Now, there's another issue is, can a landlord refuse access to an apartment or a house, or just the tenant? In California, the California Supreme Court has ruled that a landlord has no right to either grant or refuse access to an apartment, only the tenant. In other states and under the federal courts, it's fuzzy. So, but either way, you always, if it's part of a comprehensive program, you can go and get a warrant and enter the property. And then finally, fees can be imposed. So again, a couple of states have set caps on fees. Most states do not, but as far as I know, it's consistent state case law that you may not use fees collected from landlords, or for that matter, other sources, for purposes other than to support rental regulation and related matters. You cannot put that money in the general fund, and the fees must be in reasonable proportion to the cost of providing the services. So it's important to know this and to be very careful and to make sure that the municipal attorney does not tell you you can't do something if you actually can do it. And if the municipality says, I wouldn't do that because you might get sued, say, hey, buddy, I'm a local official. I get sued anyway. The issue is not whether you're going to get sued. The issue is whether, when you get sued, not if, when you get sued, will you win? Next. So, as I said, the best approach ultimately is to create a performance-based model where you're actually adjusting the nature of your enforcement activities to the track record of the landlord. Now, I've already talked about this, so I think we can keep going. The basic principle is you adjust everything. You create a very straightforward data system. Those of you who use Acela or a system like that, it's easily adapted to this purpose. And then make sure that the good landlords know they're getting a light touch. Bad landlords know that you're going to focus your attention on them until they clean up their act. Next, please. This is just an example of one city. This is a small city near Minneapolis that has had a program like this for many years. And this shows the type 1 are the best landlords. The type 4 are the worst landlords. And so the bad landlords have to actually come up with a plan. They sit down with the inspector and a specially trained police officer and work out how am I going to clean up my action plan? And that has to be approved before their license is renewed. Next. Okay. Finally, just code enforcement is a critical, a necessary element in creating a good housing stock in a community and a healthy housing stock. It is not, in many cases, in some communities where the housing market is strong and where most of the tenants and homeowners have a reasonable income, it may be enough. In many communities, especially where you have large low-income populations, either you may have low-income elderly homeowners, you may have large numbers of lower-income tenants, it's not enough. You have to provide carrots, and you have to help facilitate owners upgrading their property rather than simply dinging them for not doing so. So financial incentives, also provide non-financial incentives to motivate landlords to become better landlords. And many cities are starting to kind of bundle incentives and support for landlords into programs which are called typically good landlord programs, which are either available to landlords who meet certain criteria or to landlords who commit to meeting certain criteria. And one state that has really pushed this and all but requires it for their cities is the state of Utah, which is interesting. They've got an amazing state statute dealing with good landlords. So this is just a really quick overview of a lot of key issues in terms of code enforcement, but hopefully it will give you a sense of a kind of a vision of what to look for or where to point to in terms of really turning your code enforcement program into one that can really address the housing needs of the people in your community and their neighborhoods. So next.
Thank you, Al. Oh, you do still have, go ahead.
There are, on the website of the Center for Community Progress, we have a number of really good reports that can provide a lot of useful information to local officials, nonprofits, and others who are concerned about this. So I urge you to reach out. The web addresses are all here, and it's well worth it. Oh, by the way, Marcia, it's now communityprogress.org.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm sure the net still bounces over to org, but that's good.
I would hope so, yeah. But yeah, but here are the links, and do look at them. And again, I'm happy to discuss this. Hopefully we'll be all answering the questions, but later on I'll be happy to discuss this with people and try to provide whatever help I can. I think this is a critically important thing. Yes,
I'm going to break form and ask you to answer one question that was directly related to the issue of the use of the fees. Someone asked, is there a way for the fund of the fees to go to a repair maintenance fund that can be accessed by nonprofits?
That is a gray area.
Okay.
And if you, by the way, if you look at I discussed that question in some detail in the publication in the middle, State Policy and Problem Property Regulation. It's there, as far as I've been able to tell, the answer is probably yes, but there is no explicit case law that I'm aware of that has specifically ruled on that question. But to use it to fix up properties that are subject to code enforcement and that have been cited for violations and so forth would appear, in my mind, to be completely consistent with the language of the case law, which is not that it has to be used specifically for this or that activity, but it has to be used for the purpose for which the ordinance is created, words to that effect. So
Yeah.
I think
So
the
it's
answer is
likely.
probably yes.
Yeah. So we're going to move on now to our next speaker, Jake Dishaw. And I see Stacy, you had your hand raised. We're holding questions until the end, but if you could put your question into the Q&A, which you can click on at the bottom of your screen, probably the bottom of your screen, that would be great. And also, Alan and any of our panelists, if you want to check the Q&A and type in answers as we proceed, that would be perfectly fine. So Jake, welcome. We're so pleased to have you. Jake, well, I hope you tell people how long you've worked in code enforcement at Syracuse. I think that's really interesting. And Jake is also, you managed to hold back that the day we talked last time that the mayor was about to announce a whole thing about middle neighborhoods. So maybe you can comment on that as well. So Jake Dishaw, welcome.
Yes, thank you. And this will be Alan is a great segue into what I'll kind of talk about. A lot of the pieces he spoke about are really foundational pieces that everybody can apply nationwide and implement into, their policies and their actions within their city, town, or village. But as noted, very, very timely for us. The city of Syracuse did a very lengthy housing study and just rolled out our strategic plan around that. And to no surprise, everything Alan spoke about and what this webinar is about and investing in middle neighborhoods is exactly how we're going to try to, revive our housing stock here. Just some background information about that. It's very lengthy and it could be a whole webinar in itself, but the research from our housing study basically revealed that only about 27% of our housing stock here was in good or excellent condition. That's a lot of really, really, poor structures citywide. We're a city of about 150,000 people. There's about 40,000 parcels citywide, really old housing stock, but we're starting to see the stress and have seen the stress of a depleting quality housing stock, and we're trying to reverse that trend. And this is a kind of a new concept and something that maybe there's some discomfort, but it's something that we firmly believe in, and that our administration and then our mayor is really seeking to invest millions and millions of dollars into these middle neighborhoods, which is really a big drastic change in strategy. But what I'll talk about is kind of maybe more of a little bit of a use case on how you kind of do some of that with code enforcement. So I'm going to dive into our proactive rental inspection program here in Syracuse. We call it our rental registry. It governs 1 and 2 family non-owner occupied structures. So next slide, we'll jump right into it. I'll give a little bit of background. So why here? But I'd like all of you to think about why you should have this, or advance your program, or do some of the things Alan spoke about within your rental programs. But for us, it's because 95% of our city residential housing stock was built before 1978. Really old. That means a lot of lead contamination problems. Elevated blood lead levels. Poisoning in our children citywide. On top of that number, about 60% of our residents are renters in the city. So a lot of our citizens and a lot of our population are renting. So they're in these older housing stocks citywide. Historically, about 81% of our open, what we consider health and safety violations are in 1 to 3 unit rental properties. And we see a lot of movement with children within our city school district and our children that live here. So there's a lot of displacement. A lot of that's due to houses being declared unfit, heating issues, sewer backup issues, structural issues, lead paint issues. Obviously, you see the number there. We have an extremely high percentage of elevated blood lead levels in our children here. So it's something we're taking very seriously and trying to get a grip over. Next slide, please. Just a little bit of background and timeline, like, what Alan was talking about and everything I'll get into doesn't happen overnight. Uh, as noted, I've been with code enforcement for a long time. I've actually started working here when I was a junior in high school, part-time in summers and throughout college. Joined in 2007 after graduation. I haven't left since. So I've been in multiple roles. I've done a lot of different things within code enforcement, but now acting as the city's chief building official and zoning administrator, all of that in one department that includes, traditional code enforcement, permitting, building inspections, zoning administration, and licensing, all under one roof, one umbrella. But to date, this kind of gives a timeline of kind of where we started. So pre-16, we were kind of before anything Alan spoke about, we were more of the sheriff in town, trying to hit everybody with the stick and really chasing down complaints. So, but part of the challenge is we didn't have the tools to have a proactive code enforcement program. So we've done a lot over the years, and I won't hit all these just due to time, but we really did take a big shift from to being proactive and focusing on public health and safety issues. Now, that doesn't mean we ignore other code violations, but what Alan said is you're trying to get get the big things that might make a house go offline and be unsafe or unfit for somebody to live in. So what are those things that we need to focus on and push for so we don't lose housing units that go offline? Other parts of what we've done is just a big policy push. So we've changed a lot of laws, local laws. We've worked with state officials to really expand our authority when needed to still use that stick. The stick approach doesn't go away entirely in a proactive system. But something we did here is we implemented a administrative ticketing process. So think of it as a parking ticket for a code violation. It's administered on a local level outside of the court system. We have administrative law judges, and we try to administer fines when needed to compel compliance with code violations. If those go unpaid, we're working to roll those onto property taxes. So it's a lengthy legal process, and as Alan noted, with the warrants and all the different complex legal side of things, is beyond just the foundation and practice of your code officials. The legal teams within these systems play just as important of a role as anything else when needed. So I spoke about that, but a lot of that, we need funding for that. So in the city of Syracuse, we were awarded a lot of money through grant opportunities, luckily. And our administration, our mayor right now is in his 7th year of his second 4-year term. So I've been fortunate to have a lot of the support that I need to do this work. And I understand that nationally, that can be a challenge for you to get that support financially from your city manager, from your council, to put these funds into a budget or to seek some of this assistance through grant funding. But it doesn't end, right? Every day I'm trying to stay ahead of the curve in the changing environment and built environment around us to adapt our policies, adapt the way we're working, so that we can have an equitable and fair deployment of our resources citywide. So it's something that never ends. We're always adding things and trying to tweak things. So I encourage that from all of you. Next slide, please. Just a quick rundown of how we used to kind of be set up here, and I'll quickly go through this. So 1 and 2 family non-owner occupied rentals. Part of our program initially only included exterior inspections every 2 years, and we kind of went on like a counterclockwise system geographically throughout the city. It really didn't work well. Luckily in New York State, the state mandates anything 3 family and up must do an inspection every 36 months. So any mixed use with commercial and residential or 3 family and up is captured under that. But we've struggled with 1 and 2 family non-owner occupied rentals, which we have about 10,000 plus or minus structures citywide that have these rental units. So currently what we're doing is we are doing interior inspections to issue a license, and we're trying to really push for consent as Alan spoke about, with consent from the owner and or tenant. Our program is every 36 months, 3 years, in line with our larger properties. And we do have a process to seek warrants if we can't get consent. There are some challenges with that because your law department or your corporation counsel needs to be staffed and have the resources to allocate that attention to this. It's not, city attorneys have a lot of other things that they're working on, so there has to be capacity there. It doesn't just happen quickly or overnight. Even though it's a somewhat simple process, there's a lot of things that have to be set up and a lot of things that have to be noticed and sent out to be able to walk into a courtroom and get this without challenge. But it is possible. Next slide. So how do you do that? What are some strategies so that you can have a strategic code enforcement program and implement it into your city? So, I'm going to speak specific about, Syracuse, but these are kind of the bullet point areas that I think all of you should focus on, and some of the things you should think about what your setup's like, what your ecosystem is like, and what you can do in these areas specific to your region, your county, your state, your city, your town, your village. Next slide. So the first one, mitigating legal barriers and opposition. So one thing that we did is we changed our ordinance around a few years ago to mirror other policies in New York State that combined consent provisions with the ability to seek warrants. So before, we really didn't have that properly in place. And as Alan spoke about, we faced some legal challenges to that because procedurally we weren't really following what we should have been following to seek and get these warrants. But we changed a lot of that. But a lot of our framing of our policies have been changed to really that we're helping keep safe and healthy housing. Like, there was a big approach on being, providing that for people, that this is really a safety issue, and it's a concern to keep our constituents safe and housed in healthy housing. Next slide, please. Education and awareness was big too. And Alan spoke about it. There's got to be some incentivizing for compliance. So we were really big about getting out in the community and telling people why. Like, why do we need to do this? Why is this important? And one thing that I can talk a little bit about that we've done that's a bit unique is we've partnered with a third-party nonprofit organization. We have community ambassadors that live in the neighborhoods that we're out performing our inspections in. They know these communities, and they help bridge the gap between some of these tenants and landlords with government. And they go out and they engage with people in the evening hours, on weekends. They help build trust. So, I could do a whole segment on that, but that's one of the things that we're doing to try to, continually keep our city, our population educated and keep them aware of some of the things that we're doing. But also investments and funds for property ownership repairs, different programs, different loan assistance help that you can do, and other things that we can do. People that are complying with the rules and want to comply with our rules, what can we do to help them? What programs do we have to assist them and incentivize them? Next slide, please. Tenant outreach and education is a big one. I spoke about it a little bit. Our community ambassador program. So it's a huge network for outreach and how to reach tenants in cases where owners are not letting us in. They don't want to consent to an interior inspection on our proactive rental inspection program for 1 and 2 families. So we're going right to the tenants. We're trying to seek them out. And sometimes, for a code official working, 9 to 5 or 8:30 to 4:30, that can be hard to reach people. Sometimes they're not home, they're working a job. So this program is huge for us, where we're using our community ambassadors that are paid but are not direct employees of the Division of Code Enforcement with the city of Syracuse. They're connecting our team directly to get inside, to get consent, and to connect with people that are having challenges with code violations in their house. Sometimes there's language barriers. We have people that are from these neighborhoods that can do that for us and connect us. So it's a really unique program and has really helped us. Next slide, please. And how do you kind of do this? Like this administration right now, we're really big on data, and we're agile, and we've got an iterative process, and we're always looking to kind of stay ahead of the curve and make quick adjustments, quick wins. But we do look at historical data sets and kind of where do we need to deploy our resources. When I first started here, we were just split up. We just split the city into a quadrant. We just drew a big plus sign through the city, and that's how our inspectors were deployed. It's much different now. We have catchment areas by working inspector titles. So our housing inspectors are in geographical areas based on an equitable deployment based on history of average cases, types of structures. So they're all in geographic areas that are sized appropriately, so we can provide citywide coverage, equitably. So it's not equal, but it's equitable. That's one of the things that we've done to help do this. But a lot of this comes from data. So we have data analysts on our staff, budgeted within our department. Highly recommend looking into that and doing some of that work if you haven't already. And then piloting different programs and different policies and different initiatives, to help achieve your goals. Next slide, please. Lastly, creating a holistic policy ecosystem. I spoke about it. I keep using that word, but it's more than just code enforcement. I say it quite often, but we partner with pretty much every department citywide to achieve our code enforcement goals and to keep our city safe, and to keep our constituents in safe and healthy housing. So that includes, but not limited to, our police department, our fire department, fire prevention unit, with our fire marshals, our engineering department, our public works department, our law department, our Bureau of Administrative Adjudication, which is the ticketing program I spoke about, our neighborhood and business development, planning and sustainability. Like, everybody is touching and is related to driving these policies, and helping improve our housing stock. So think about what your ecosystem is, what you need to add to it, what you wish you could add to it, and how you kind of bring all those people together, and put a roadmap together that you can implement to either focus on whether it's rental housing, maybe it's something different, but for us, we really stress that we get inside on our 1 and 2 family non-owner occupied rentals, because we wouldn't be able to test for lead hazards if we didn't get inside. You saw some of the data earlier and some of the percentages and things that we struggle with here. So that's key. So that's one key example here. Next slide, please. That's it. So hopefully, I'm sure we'll probably move on to Larry first, but hold any questions and I'll try to answer them at the end.
I will ask you one, Jake, which is how many code enforcement officers do you have on staff?
We have total around 30 doing a combination of housing inspections, commercial building inspections, and permit inspections.
Okay. So I hope that's meaningful to the person who answered the question. That does kind of cover a lot of different waterfronts, but and what's the population of Syracuse, or the number of structures or something?
Well, for our rental registry, we have about 10,000 structures. We're doing those every 3 years. For example, we have 14 housing inspectors that work on that, but they also look at all of our vacant lots, our vacant structures, and they do all of our tenant complaint calls as well.
Okay, great. So let's turn it over to Larry. Larry's in a really unusual position, which I'm sure he'll describe, of not actually being a code enforcement person himself right now anyway, but working with a lot of different code enforcement departments throughout his county. So take it away, Larry.
Thank you. And I know we're at almost at 11 now, and we wanted to have from 11 to 11:30 to do Q&A. So I'm just going to let you guys all know now. I'm going to blow through these slides really quickly.
Yeah. And we're also answering questions in, we're typing answers too along the way. So we're trying to keep up.
Great. So this is being recorded, and the slides are going to be made available to you. So that gives me that privilege to be able to do that. I also want to acknowledge this privilege of being able to be here. I want to thank Marcia and Alan and Jacob for allowing me to join them on this panel, and thank the National Community Stabilization Trust and all the people behind the scenes that are making this all possible. And thank you, the folks who are attending, of which I know there are many of my sister and brother code enforcement officers watching. So what I say may be a lot like preaching to the choir, but my ask of you is this. After hearing this sermon, please go forth from this virtual sanctuary out to those who do not know us well or take us for granted, and use the information that you've heard today from Alan and Jacob and other data to justify not only your own existence, but why you deserve more support and more resources, such as staffing and training. My fellow California Association of Code Enforcement officers board, he's a board member, Matt Silva, always refers to us as the Swiss Army knife of municipal government. For we are not just housing, we're zoning, vehicle abatement, animal control, cannabis, massage parlor, nightclub, homeless camp, street vendor regulators, and so many other tasks that are of strategic importance to preserving not only middle neighborhoods, but the entire community. So again, go forth, advocate to our elected officials in particular, but also to community leaders and others, because as we say back home, a closed mouth will not get fed. So with that introduction, I am supposed to talk about what jurisdictions can do in regards to healthy housing strategies while waiting to adopt a proactive rental inspection program, using Oakland as the example. So let's provide a little context here in terms of this map that you have. You can see Alameda County outlined. You can see Oakland. We're right across the bay from San Francisco, which Alan made mention of in terms of the court precedent that was set through their aches and pains, which actually resulted in LA County being able to establish their systematic code enforcement program back in 1998, which later on won a $1 million Harvard Innovations Award back in 2005. So they're one of my favorites to point to others in terms of establishing proactive rental inspection programs. If you look to the north of Oakland, you'll see Berkeley. Berkeley has a proactive rental inspection program, but through my research, I learned that there was a lot of heartache behind that. There was a fatality that occurred in Berkeley due to like a water heater that wasn't vented properly that kind of triggered it. Then later on, there was the 2015 balcony collapse that also influenced Berkeley and their establishment. To the south of Oakland, you have the city of Hayward. Hayward also went through a lot of legal heartburn like San Francisco in order to establish their program. And then to the south of Hayward, you have Fremont, which has gone through a lot of aches and pains trying to establish a proactive rental inspection program. But the Rental Housing Association of Southern Alameda County continues to brag to me about how they've been victorious in preventing Fremont from establishing a proactive rental inspection program. And for some reason, they like to brag about the fact that they prevented the unincorporated county from opting into a child lead poisoning prevention fee program. The unincorporated county actually would be the fourth largest city in the county if it were a city. Oakland, Berkeley, and Hayward are our largest, and Fremont are our largest cities now, but unincorporated county would actually be the fourth largest if they became a city. The next slide, please. So this latest census data gives you a picture of where we sit in relation to the state and the nation pertaining to older homes. The units built before 1939 make up 19% for the county and 37% for Oakland. You can correctly assume we have a lot of properties out there with lead paint hazards, and older homes also might have healthy housing challenges such as asthma triggers like mold, putting children in the ER, trip hazards, accessibility issues, putting older adults in the hospital as well. I'm quoting here from the Oakland Race and Equity Impact Analysis report they did to the Oakland City Council in 2021, where they stated, The American Census survey data shows approximately 95,402 rental units in Oakland, of which single-family dwellings account for 27%, duplexes 9%, and 3 to 4 unit buildings 16%. The American Census study data lumps properties with 5 to 9 units together, making it difficult to estimate how many additional 5 units buildings there are in Oakland. Next slide. So given the previous slide and the quote, it might shock some to know that my department and my job would not exist if not for Oakland, which in the 1960s was sounding the alarm about lead paint. I recall a few years ago on CNN, United Shades of America host Camu Bell, who lives in the Oakland Bay Area, was doing a story on lead poisoning in Philadelphia. And he told a mother of a lead poisoned child, I quote, "I am so glad we don't have lead poisoning in California." She replied, "If you have pre-1978 housing, you do." But Mr. Bell should not be embarrassed, as it is common to find people in the Bay Area who believe lead poisoning does not exist, when there are over 400 children in Alameda County every year that are lead poisoned. Most of them live in Oakland. There are over 256,000 people, including 1 in 4 children living in Alameda County, that have been diagnosed with asthma, which is often triggered by substandard conditions such as pest and mold. And guess what? Most of those live in Oakland. In a 2-year span, there was over 287,491 emergency room related visits for unintentional injuries occurring within the home. Primarily, we're talking about senior citizens taking falls, getting hurt. That's Alameda County as a whole, 287,491 ER visits. But guess what? Most of those occurred in Oakland. Next slide. So fortunately for Oakland, there were people who in the 1980s carried on the work of the Black Panther Party, which along with the Brown Berets and Young Lords had originated community health fairs that tested for sickle cell and child lead poisoning prevention. What they were able to do was establish what's called a county service area fee of $10 on all pre-1978 housing units. Now, unfortunately, that fee was only established for the cities of Oakland, Berkeley, city of Alameda, and the city of Emeryville. Other cities did not opt into it back in 1991 when it was established. And unfortunately, after that, there was a ballot measure that was passed by the Jarvis-Gann Taxpayers Association that prevented cities and counties from opting into that fee. There are some ballot measures coming forward this year that may reverse that trend and allow counties and cities to again opt into that fee on pre-1978 housing in order to use money to address healthy housing issues. Next slide, please. For those cities that were opted into the county service area fee, over the last 30 years, we've been able to use that fee and bring in all kinds of funding from the federal government as well as the state government. And you can see some of the figures there with regards to that. So with that as the backdrop and providing some context here, I'd like to talk a little bit more about Oakland. Next slide, please. So I know a department head, he's nicknamed The Rock. And it's not after Dwayne Johnson, the professional wrestler, action movie star. He's called The Rock because his subordinate managers joke about how when you come to him with a proposal, he will say, "Bring me more data." So the data is The Rock. And so you bring him more data, and then he says, I'm not sure I'm ready to support your ideas, so I need more data. In other words, more rocks. So the veteran managers laugh, saying that the rookie managers will bring him a bag and then a box and then a wheelbarrow and then a pickup truck. And finally, when they're on the verge of bringing him a dump truck full of rocks, the light bulb goes off and they begin to realize that the rock is not going to make a decision about their proposal until perhaps his boss and or elected officials run into a situation where they begin to make requests that line up with your proposal. So this photo was taken in 2018, and it shows you all of the rocks that Oakland City Council and or the mayor received between 2011 and 2018, urging them to adopt a proactive rental inspection program. The majority of these reports are from city staff, with a couple of exceptions being a joint report by our public health department and My Healthy Homes department. There's also on that table a letter from the California Association of Code Enforcement, where they offered to train city staff at no charge for developing a proactive rental inspection program following the tragic loss of life resulting from the Ghost Ship Warehouse fire, in which 36 people lost their lives in a building not zoned for residential use. The moral story of the story here really is reactive will cost lives, proactive can save lives. Next slide. So you might have detected from that some frustration or disappointment in me regarding Oakland, and you'd be right. I was born in New Orleans, proud product of Africans, Chinese, French, Canadian, Irish settlers, slaves smuggled in during the Civil War, cheap labor shipped in after the war ended from China. I am also proud to say when mom moved me here as a child, I lived for a time in San Francisco and Berkeley before she settled in Oakland, where I grew up believing in Wakanda, or I said Oaklanda, because in those days we had Black mayors, Black city administrators, Black department heads, thriving Black businesses. And of course, I'm very, very proud of becoming a California State Certified Code Enforcement Officer and former head of code enforcement in Sacramento County in the city of West Sacramento, which is located in Yolo County. So with that kind of background, Oakland for the last several years has acknowledged the need for a proactive rental inspection program. And over the last 12 years, they've used me as a subject matter expert working along with several Oakland staff and hired consultants to implement a proactive rental inspection program. And as such, I have connected Oakland's top officials and staff with managers of proactive rental inspection programs from all over California, as I mentioned, LA, for example, Sacramento, San Francisco, and Rochester, New York, which is another one of my favorites, one of the few programs that also includes lead testing in their inspections. However, last month, the city announced that they will again be putting out a new request for hiring a consultant to provide them with advice on how to implement a proactive rental inspection program. In other words, bring me another rock. Next slide. So I just read a remarkable book that I'm recommending to all code enforcement, building inspectors, zoning investigators, animal control officers. Okay, let's just say all you neighborhood preservationists, and also all you elected officials or those wishing to become elected officials and public administrators. And this book that I'm recommending isn't the book you see in this slide, even though that's a great book with a lot of great information. And it's not even one of Alan's books. Alan's written many of them, and those are recommended reading. But what I want to recommend to you now is a book that just recently came out that I read. It's entitled A Case for Beauty, History and Philosophy of Code Enforcement by Eugene Apper. And you can find it online, and I posted on LinkedIn so that people can look at some excerpts from it. But I fully believe in the power of history, and I believe for code enforcement, if you don't know your roots, you can't grow. And that's one of the reasons why I'm recommending that book. If you read that book, next slide. Oh, repeat the title. Okay. It's A Case for Beauty, History and Philosophy of Code Enforcement by Eugene Alper. So if you read that book, then you might see a connection between Oakland's lack of a proactive rental inspection program and how the Great Migration that brought Black people from the South to Oakland and now out of Oakland is not just tied to housing becoming too expensive. You might even get it in terms of how the city lost its professional football, basketball, and soon about to lose their professional baseball team. And not just because the team owners wanted new stadiums elsewhere. The point that I get from Mr. Alper's book is that code enforcement is a naturally occurring product of people living within close proximity of each other. And when it is not optimized, such as with a proactive rental inspection program, ultimately you have varying degrees of chaos. And people, businesses, and even sports teams will leave chaos if they can do so. A reminder here, we are the Swiss Army knife of municipal government. As a building inspector friend of mine told me, quote, I believe the vast majority of my work goes unnoticed by the public until I do not do it. In other words, we represent the broken window theory on steroids. Now, chaos doesn't mean everyone who can afford to leaves Oakland. Next slide. And so if there is a silver lining to gentrification, it might be that history might repeat itself in terms of the activism of Pueblo, People United for a Better Life in Oakland. Because as Alan pointed out, oftentimes people in the community are afraid to speak up, especially nowadays in terms of retaliation. But it will be hard for activism to occur in Oakland because the rental housing industry is very powerful in being able to fund people's elections, so much so that they now have successfully gotten many elected officials in California and elsewhere to stop even referring to them as landlords. In fact, I am told by some of my friends in the rental housing industry that are into this rebranding because they don't want to see people associating them with, quote, slumlords, that they are now pushing legislation in California to strike the word landlord from all state documents and replace it with some other word, perhaps something like rental housing provider. More recently, they've claimed they're doing that because of it's politically correct to change the word because landlord represents a time in the past when only rich men own lands, landlords. And so they're really not doing it to rebrand themselves. They're doing it because it's the politically correct thing to do. Next slide. So adding fuel to the fire of the attempts to have a proactive rental inspection program in Oakland is the lead paint lawsuit. The lead paint lawsuit was a 20-year battle that was taken on by Oakland, Alameda, and several other jurisdictions where we sued the paint companies for selling lead-based paint long after they knew that it was not only harming children, but even killing their own employees. And after 20 years and all the way through the court system to the Supreme Court, we actually won a symbolic victory, I should say, because out of the settlement, only $24 million was actually given to Alameda and Oakland to utilize. Next slide here talks about the race and equity impact analysis that the city of Oakland used in order to explain why they should get the majority of that lead paint settlement money as opposed to it being spent countywide. And I would recommend that you go to the City of Oakland website or Google Oakland Race and Equity Impact Report, Lead Poisoning Prevention Report. because it really is a great analysis, which I think it is a model that could be used throughout the country in terms of justifying why you may want to, if nothing else, do targeted proactive rental inspection programs in communities of color and low-income folks. And while this report is somewhat critical of my department's failure to eradicate the child lead poisoning within the county, again, I say overall, it's excellent analysis. And I don't blame Oakland for being critical of us. That we could do a better job. And of course, they wanted to try to get the whole $24 million. So of course, they needed to try to justify that, even if it meant maybe throwing Larry Brooks under the bus a little bit. I still love y'all. Next slide.
Larry, could I have us wrap up so we can get a couple of questions in?
Okay, so this next slide just is an example of what you will find in that race and equity impact analysis report in terms of the data that was being used to justify the recommendations that came out of Oakland. And if you switch to the next slide, just 2 more slides here, you will see that their recommendations, their top recommendation is to use that lead settlement money to pay for a proactive rental inspection program, which is something that we've actually been trying to get them to do for over 12 years. So next slide here is just an example of what we've done in the meantime. We actually used the EPA grant to provide training to Oakland code enforcement officers to get their renovation, repair, painting rules certifications. We've done similar trainings throughout the state. And as a result of that, next slide, we were actually able to get a law passed that eventually the state of California is going to take over the enforcement of the renovation, repair, painting rule. And that is a direct result of the training that we did beginning in Oakland with the EPA grant. Next slide. And then we've done a number of things in terms of legislation to, again, help push Oakland and other cities in the right direction. Alan mentioned that everyone has to have a tenant complaint response program. In California, that was not so until 2 years ago when we got this law passed that says everybody has to have at least a complaint response program. Our hope is that through having complaint response programs, you can use that data in order to then justify eventually a proactive rental inspection program. We also have advanced legislation to give our code enforcement officers the authority to enforce mold and also to enforce things such as indoor air quality issues like secondhand smoke. Also integrated pest management. And we also passed working on legislation to resurrect the code enforcement incentive grant program that went away in 2001, I think it was 2003, because we know some jurisdictions need money in order to pilot proactive rental inspection programs. And then next slide, which is the last slide, is we just recently had a law that was passed, which some people call it proactive rental inspection program light, like in Diet Coke or Diet Pepsi, because it's not proactive rental inspection, but it gives you the authority to inspect neighboring units when you go out. Alan mentioned sometimes you go out to inspect based on a complaint, but you don't inspect any of the neighboring units. Well, under this law, you can, based on the type of complaint it is, you may be able to go into other units and inspect. And that would, next slide would just be my contact information.
Thank you, Larry. I really feel like Larry's situation is an example of how the community can, if you can't get what you want within the system, then you can start to create a structure that's outside the system, but that can start to influence the rest of it. And I really think that Larry is a great example of the kind, a person that can both advocate for the community, but also work with local code enforcement departments in a way that gets them to be their best selves, perhaps we should say, but, you know, inspiring some action there. It's a really interesting line to walk, Larry, for you, I imagine, as an outsider. And it actually kind of makes me wonder, as I was thinking about how many municipalities you interact with, if there might ever be a group of maybe smaller cities in any state who could benefit from collectively hiring a person like you to help them, you know, sort of move all of their code enforcement departments to the next level. But that's a question for another day.
Yeah,
Well,
Oakland gets
actually-
me for free. But Oakland
Yeah.
will always get me for free since I'm Alameda County.
Actually, Marcia, I think that's a very relevant question, because, you know, you got in a lot of places, you know, you think of some place like Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, where you've got like 133 separate municipalities with an average of about 6,000 population each, and suburban Cook County and so forth. Depending on, you know I worked on a project with the Southern Cook County Council of Governments some years ago precisely on the idea of having them develop a centralized code enforcement program, which individual small cities and towns and villages could contract with to get those services. Because if you're a town of 1,000 or 1,500 or 3,000, 5,000 people, you can't do it. There's a comment in the chat from somebody who is a one-man band in a town who does code enforcement, parking enforcement, a bunch of other stuff. Just him. That's ridiculous. You never get ahead of the curve that way. So developing regional programs is something that could be a huge asset in large parts of this country.
I would think so. I'm glad that someone who actually knows a lot about code enforcement thinks so too. It's not really my area of expertise at all. I'm more of a neighborhood strategy, nonprofit CDC type of person, but I always see code enforcement as such a critical part of the bag of tools needed to maintain neighborhoods. And it's just, you know, to summarize what we've been talking about here today, it's really, I think, there are incredible opportunities for code enforcement and neighborhood CDCs or neighborhood associations or whatever the structure is to work proactively together on this stuff. And I love the kind of tools and ideas that all of you have presented today, and including some of our participants in the chat have had some really great techniques that they've reported on there. So I guess in summary, I'd say, you know, there are fantastic ways to do code enforcement that make the code enforcement folks happy and neighborhoods happier and get you where you want to go. It may not always make landlords happier, but that's not the goal of code enforcement. So I hope everyone is inspired by what Alan, Larry, and Jake shared today. I think Jake and Larry for sure have shared their contact information, and which indicates a willingness to talk further. Alan, are you willing?
Yeah, I added, you know, if you go in the Q&A, I put my contact information right below where Jake put his, so people can go there and find it.
So everybody's willing to talk more to you. I think we're all so interested in this topic that we just really want to, if we can move things, you know, an inch toward the better, we're willing to do that. And I also want to re-mention again, the Center for Community Progress. They have invested a lot of resources in more than most national intermediaries on the topic of code enforcement and how to improve it. I am not intimately familiar enough to know what's currently on offer there, but I feel like there are times when they have technical assistance grants as well that might assist you, you know, more intensively with looking over your code enforcement systems and thinking about changes. Is that true, Alan?
Yeah, we get some foundation funding or bank funding, which we can use to provide technical assistance, free.
Yeah.
But at the same time, a lot of our work, we've got to eat too. So we
Yeah,
also
yeah.
do
So
fee
you
for
can do it for
service
fee
work,
as well.
or we can do part fee for service and part that we subsidize and so forth.
Yeah.
So by
yeah.
all means, if reach out to, not to me directly, but to the center, the staff at the center. I'm not full-time.
If it's about that, yeah, you can reach out to Alan if you have a
If you're,
specific.
or you can reach out to me and I'll connect you with the right person at the Center for Community Progress in terms of developing some kind of a more formal technical assistance activity.
Sounds good. So don't let lack of technical solutions be the thing that stops you on any of this. And as is true of, I think, everything in community development, the hardest part is not knowing what the technical solution is. It's figuring out the adaptive solution to get everybody on board with it, right? Larry's like, oh yeah. So those are the things I think that these three panelists can really be helpful with because they've done it themselves so many times. So I want to thank everybody very much for being here. Thanks to our panelists. And our next webinar, we don't have the date picked yet, but it's going to be on special purpose credit programs and maybe some other strategies to achieve equitable homeownership in middle neighborhoods. We also have an engagement chat that we do. I think we're at quarterly right now. So anyone that's into community engagement about middle neighborhoods, Anne leads that, and that next one will be on July 17th. Please email us if you have any ideas, Marcia, MARCIA @middleneighborhoods.org. We love your ideas. We're always looking for ideas for webinars, so hit us up. Check out the Cornerstone webinar series at Center for Community Progress, our partner. They do a great series of webinars as well. And in the evaluation afterward, tell us about your experience today. It was really a pleasure to have so many of our code enforcement colleagues in the house today. We really appreciate it. Thanks to everybody and have a great rest of the week.
Thank you.
Thank you.